It was 7 a.m. when my phone alarm went off. In the bedroom, my husband, Ryan, was still deep in sleep. His carefree state had become a symbol of the distance between us in recent years. Over the 10 years we had spent together, our love had gradually been replaced by routines. Everything had become a routine. A brief good morning in the mornings, silent hours spent in front of the TV at night, and the occasional ordinary moments shared. Before leaving the house, I looked in the mirror. There had been an emptiness inside me for years. The tired lines on my face were not only the marks of sleeplessness, but also of emotional exhaustion. I didn't think Ryan had noticed this change. Maybe he didn't want to. That day, as I was heading to work, I felt an odd sensation inside me. My heart was racing, and I didn't know why. Was it Mr. Johnson's presence affecting me so much, or was it just the adrenaline hunger brought on by a monotonous life? Although I couldn't admit it to myself, every glance, every word from Mr. Johnson deeply affected me. Ryan and I had started our marriage with passionate love. We met in college and dreamed together about the future. But real life had gradually erased those dreams one by one. As Ryan spent more time at work, I started feeling more and more alone. At first, I tried to fill this loneliness with books, friends, and hobbies. But over time, those efforts weren't enough. When I met Mr. Johnson, something that I thought was long forgotten inside me reignited. He was a charismatic and confident man. Everyone at the office respected him, but to feel that I was the one he was interested in, it was a completely different feeling. He reminded me of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Being a woman in my marriage. The day I walked into Mr. Johnson's office, there was a tense air. After a long and intense meeting, he had called me into his office. "Megan, we need to talk about your work performance," he said. But there was a different tone in his voice. It felt more like a personal conversation than a work discussion. "I've been appreciating the attention to detail in your work lately," he continued. His eyes were deep and mesmerizing. Every word he spoke seemed to draw me in, changing the entire atmosphere of the room. In that moment, I realized Mr. Johnson didn't see me just as an employee. After that conversation, his attitude toward me shifted slightly, but noticeably. He would suggest working late hours under the pretext of office busyness, finding ways to get closer to me at every opportunity. This closeness both excited and scared me. One evening, after work, Mr. Johnson found me alone in the office. "Does working this late not stress you out?" he asked, smiling warmly at me. His demeanor was breaking down my defenses one by one. "No, it's fine. I enjoy my work," I replied, but the slight tremor in my voice failed to hide how I was feeling. At that moment, Mr. Johnson stepped closer to me and whispered, "Sometimes work isn't just about work, Megan." The intensity in his eyes instantly erased all the distance between us. I'll never forget that night. When Mr. Johnson invited me to dinner, every part of me screamed that this was wrong. But his attraction was so powerful that I couldn't say no. In a dimly lit restaurant, Mr. Johnson's words enveloped me like a spell. "You seem to be missing something in your life that completes you," he said. Hearing that sentence, which I had been asking myself for years, I wanted to open up to him completely. After the dinner, as he opened the car door for me, he said, "I don't want this night to end yet." At that moment, all the rules of logic I had fallen apart. I made the perhaps most courageous, but also the most dangerous decision of my life, to go with him. In Mr. Johnson's car, the only sound echoing in the silence was the beating of our hearts. When the door to the hotel room opened, all my guilt and fears turned into pure passion. Mr. Johnson's touch was the signal of a sensation I had longed for. In that moment, I forgot everything. My marriage, my position at work, even my own identity. Throughout the night, Mr. Johnson's attention made me feel more valuable than I had in years. But when morning came, there was a reality I had to face. Was this just a one-night escape, or the beginning of something that would change my life forever? When I returned to my marriage, I wasn't ready to face Ryan. His silent, questioning gaze made me feel even more guilty. But Mr. Johnson's presence had taken such a strong hold of my heart that I knew I couldn't stay away from him. This forbidden relationship had both revived me and turned my life into a tangled knot. Every moment with Mr. Johnson was a secret that needed to be kept, yet it was an irresistible passion. After that night with Mr. Johnson, things were never the same. Every morning as I went to work with a big excitement in my heart, I also carried the heavy burden of guilt. But seeing him, hearing his voice, feeling his presence kept me connected to life again. Mr. Johnson, on the other hand, acted as if nothing had happened, maintaining his professionalism, which only made him more attractive to me. One morning, when I entered the office, I found a small note on my desk. "I'm waiting for you in my office tonight. We need to talk." As I read the note, my hands trembled. Realizing that Mr. Johnson's interest in me wasn't just a fleeting fancy, stirred both fear and passion in my heart. That evening, I stayed late at the office. After everyone had left, I walked toward his office, my heart nearly jumping out of my chest. Mr. Johnson was waiting for me by the door. His eyes were so intense that I felt like he was touching my soul with just a glance. He closed the door and walked toward me. "Megan, this can't go on," he said. But his voice didn't sound like an end. It sounded like a beginning. "I've tried to avoid my feelings for you, but I can't. This feeling is more real than anything else." Those words were everything I had wanted to hear, but they also came with a great responsibility. "Mr. Johnson, this isn't right. My marriage, my job," I whispered, but my words were cut off as his hands touched my face with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. This was a turning point for us. From then on, secret meetings, hidden messages, and days filled with a desire to touch each other began. Every moment was full of both excitement and the fear of being caught. But this relationship gave me everything I had been missing in my marriage: attention, passion, and the feeling of being valued. Ryan had started to notice the changes in me. My interest in him had completely faded. I was doing everything I could to avoid eye contact during dinner. While I secretly checked my phone for messages, I could feel his gaze on me. But Ryan, instead of confronting me, preferred to stay silent. This silence both comforted me and made me feel even more guilty. One evening, Ryan unexpectedly came closer to me. "Something's different lately. Don't you notice it?" he asked. His eyes were filled with sadness, but also with questioning. "Maybe something is missing in our marriage, but we can fix it together, Megan." His words deeply affected me, but it was too late. My feelings for Mr. Johnson were so strong that the thought of giving Ryan another chance never crossed my mind. The relationship I had with Mr. Johnson soon became uncontrollable. We began meeting not only at the office, but also on business trips and weekends. However, keeping this relationship a secret became increasingly difficult. One day, I felt the gaze of a colleague on me. Especially when I was with Mr. Johnson, his suspicious glances made me uneasy. I began to think he might have noticed something. One day, he said, "You and Mr. Johnson get along really well," in an insinuating tone. Those words sent a chill down my spine. Mr. Johnson, however, remained calm and in control as always. "No one will figure it out, don't worry," he said. I wanted to trust him, but my fears kept haunting me. The relationship I had with Mr. Johnson soon became uncontrollable. We began meeting not only at the office, but also on business trips and weekends. However, Keeping this relationship a secret became increasingly difficult. One day, I felt the gaze of a colleague on me. Especially when I was with Mr. Johnson, his suspicious glances made me uneasy. I began to think he might have noticed something. One day, he said, "You and Mr. Johnson get along really well," in an insinuating tone. Those words sent a chill down my spine. Mr. Johnson, however, remained calm and in control as always. "No one will figure it out, don't worry," he said. I wanted to trust him, but my fears kept haunting me. One evening, when I was invited to Mr. Johnson's house, things got even more complicated. He had told his wife that he was on a business trip, and I, on the other hand, had told Ryan that I was going to a friend's gathering before leaving the house. At Mr. Johnson's house, everything felt so natural and sincere that for a moment I thought I could build a new life with him. However, this forbidden relationship inevitably came to light. When Ryan discovered the messages on my phone, everything was exposed. At that moment, I had to face every decision I had made in my life. The disappointment on Ryan's face, Mr. Johnson's indifference, and the guilt within me pulled me into a deep void. I had lost both my marriage and my reputation at work. So, what would Mr. Johnson do at the end of this relationship? After the storm we went through, my relationship with Mr. Johnson ended. He chose to forget everything and move on with his life. As for me, I was left alone, having lost Ryan, my credibility at work, and everything I had built. This relationship taught me the magic of passion and the cost of a forbidden love. To rebuild my life, I had to lose so much. But there's one thing I could never forget: the depth in Mr. Johnson's eyes and the chaos he created within me. Thank you for watching and listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.